an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Children of Divinity, Book 3, Ascend, chapters 29 and 30. In these chapters, well, Brian, I don't want to say he saves. He does save, but he also doesn't save. A lot happens, many things, and then we get this decision that I don't agree with. I don't know what to... There's just a lot to talk about. I don't know where to go. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. What's up? Heather is here in the chat with me. So there is a surprise for me in the way that these chapters go. And this is not the end. I believe one more episode, correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, and that will wrap up the rest of the book, but I may be wrong about that. It's hard for me to tell. I was really not expecting for some things to shake out the way that they do. And part of me is sort of glad, and I'm going to get into it all, but I have very mixed feelings about some of it. I also have to note that at the end of this couple of chapters, Briar Young is fucking not mentioned once at all. So I have to assume he's bailed. And I am going to need them to go find him. I know that we've got Spears, and we've got Trechak, and we've got Whip Scorpion, we've got plenty of other villains. But for me, Briar is villain number one. Briar is in a whole other class. It's just different with him. He is a weasel. He's a survivor of a type that will come back around to ruin your life later at some point. It's inevitable. So while I completely understand the focus on the people that we are focusing on this time and the need to take them down, and I agree that they are the most immediate threat, I'm not arguing that. I also really wanted at some point for Viper to mention that Briar is still alive and what he did to her, and it doesn't come up quite yet. And I need her to just tell everybody and for all of them to spread out and begin searching for him. Because that would be on my mind. And granted, she has been through quite a lot. So I'm not blaming her. But it was the kind of thing that was sort of forefront in my mind. And I kept waiting for her to say something about it. And it just doesn't come up. And I wanted so badly to step into the story and be like, guys, look, she hasn't gotten around to telling you this part yet. But this guy... not only is he not dead, but he has the power to completely incapacitate women and has raped multiples of them and was definitely going to rape her, except that he wasn't allowed, but he would have. And he was very excited about the torture she was going to undergo. Please go find him. I have to assume that they would be able to track him down. I am going to assume that this does come up later and they do track him down because I need to believe that. And if... I know that, Heather, you have said that there are a lot of side stories that your husband has worked on. If Briar isn't caught by the end of this book, and I have to find out whether he gets caught in a side story, I'm going to be very agitated. I'm putting that out there right now. I need him to be caught by the end of this book. So there's that. I'm putting that out right now. Secondly, I know that last episode I got so wrapped up in talking about, I believe what I got wrapped up in was the conversation between Widow and Jenna. And so I didn't give the attention to this part where she gets got by Briar that it really deserved. But I don't know if there was anything specific, Heather, that I didn't talk about that you wanted me to. I feel like it was just overall, I felt Briar getting Viper was the realization of something I had dreaded so deeply, that not having the time by the end of the episode to really dwell on how horrible I found this was the problem for me. It wasn't so much that I just didn't get to talk about it at all. I just felt like it deserved a lot more than I was able to give it. So apologies for that. But sometimes I get extremely excited about talking about one part of the story and I just sort of lose track of time. My apologies. That's me being me. So, this chapter begins with Scorpion, and he is in the middle of dodging a bunch of shots from plasma weapons. What we get here mostly is the sense that between him and Stryker, they are starting to lose ground a little bit, and they are beginning to feel like a lot more pressed. There's just an overall sense of, we were doing pretty well considering how outnumbered we've been, and I am super proud of us, but we're only so many people with only so much energy, and we are starting to wane a little bit here. And this is when Stryker says, I get it. I get why we aren't killing, and I'm not mad about it, but I kind of think that the time has come where we have to get serious about putting some of these people down. And Scorpion says, not yet. And by the end of these two chapters, I don't think that they have gotten real tough with anybody. Like, they are still continuing the policy of using non-lethal force, as far as I can tell. And I believe that's the right thing to do in the case of these fucking literal children that have been transformed. It's so gross. And I love being inside Scorp's head and him just thinking, this guy, I mean, beyond the pale. It was funny to me, though, because Scorp is thinking to himself, like, I've met a lot of awful people, and I don't think most of them would ever do something like this. And one of the ones that he mentioned was warlords. And he thinks to himself how he doesn't think they would have made children into, like, weapons. And I was sort of thinking, isn't that, like, the entire deal with warlords is usually getting kids super young and turning them into weapons? I thought that was the whole thing. But nevertheless, Scorp is just, like, particularly disgusted by this entire situation. And having to fight fucking children, it just does not sit well with him. So he and Stryker are sort of trying to figure out what their next move is going to be. They take cover because they get overwhelmed at one point. And Stryker is like, do you know where Jordan is? Because I haven't seen her or heard from her, or like, what's going on? And both of them are just like, no info. I'm sorry, but they're worried, but they just don't have any way to, like, go search for her right now. They don't have it. So as they're sitting there, Mindstorm comes busting out of a stand of trees, and she's, like, glancing behind her and sending these, like, telepathic bolts to take down some of these people, which sounds so brutal. And when Scorp gets to her and helps her up, she says, those metamorphs are all over me every second. They're targeting me. They must have passed my scent around somehow. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm assuming that she's being targeted because her power can stretch so far. You know, they use her abilities to sort of sense whether somebody that they're looking for is in the vicinity or if there's an attack that's heading their way. And I could see that that advantage being something that you kind of immediately want to knock out. But I am curious, like, how they got, I don't remember if we saw this, but getting her sent and focusing on her in that way was surprising to me. So this is when Scorp asks her, can you see if you can get in touch with Viper mentally? Because we don't know where she is or what's going on with her. And she tries, but she says, not only can I not sense Viper, the West Wing seems completely empty. And Stryker's like, that doesn't seem right. And Scorp says they're using the blind. Have we heard about this, Heather? The blind? I can't remember. It's a telepathic white noise generator that was installed in the West Wing to protect the president from telepathic spying and manipulation during sensitive meetings. So I'm assuming this is like a pretty recent thing once they figured out that basically superhuman beings exist, that they decided to install something like this. And I am really curious where they got the tech for this, because it seems fairly recent that the news has dropped about these superhumans. And for them to already have something that's like combating mental manipulation is impressive. Like, that's pretty wild. But anyway, yeah, so Mindstorm says that means I can't go in there. The psi traps will trigger if I set foot within 100 feet of the Oval Office. Oh, that's true. Heather is saying, well, remember, the government knew about metas a lot longer than the general public. That's true. And you could just have some fucking random install it and be like, oh, it scrambles like signals so that people can't spy with tech. You could just say it's anything. So they talk for a minute about like who's going to go where. And he wants to go in and look for her. Scorp does. And he definitely tells Stryker, you have to stay out here because you're practically invulnerable to any of the shots they're taking. And Mindstorm at this point is like, I am detecting a lot of people coming very quickly. And I was sort of like, oh no, does Spears have backup? But no, this is our people. So we get to see Achilles in action. Cassidy Law, who was Achilles, which is wild. I keep thinking about it and just being like, I can't compute that. That is just not, like, my brain's just doesn't want to. It's too much. And Cassidy, when he busts in here, he is so... The spectacle of it. I know he's not doing this on purpose. I know that he's not... He's fighting to get through. He is not fighting to show off. However, the way he goes about this does feel like so showman-y. So Cassidy Law landed in the middle of a squad of Vandres. I feel like I've asked this before. Vandres soldiers who were attempting to push out of the trees. His blade glowed with almost blinding incandescence, small motes of energy dancing around his fist as he swung it with inhuman speed and power. The soldiers opened up on full auto, sizzling bolts of red and orange impacting uselessly against the Greek hoplite-style armor. Almost contemptuously, Cassidy backhanded several men in one motion as he strode to where Scorp and the others were crouched. Occasionally, he swatted the sizzling energy bolts aside with his sword and reformed it into a smaller stabbing blade. His other arm raised, and a blue energy shield flashed into being. Like a warrior of old, he mowed through another squad of men, spinning, parrying, and blocking forcing the latest attack to falter. Once the soldiers fell back to regroup, the tall man continued on his way. Holy shit, Mindstorm breathed. So, yeah, that's quite intense. And him and Harm, and I think somebody else comes and drops in here. Who is this second one? Or really not second. It's more like sixth. Oh, well, Jill shows up and she has a hole in her costume. And her dad is like, babe, are you okay? And she's like, no, I'm healed. I heal really fast, Dad. It's fine. And he still has to be like, well, be careful. And I was like, okay, Dad, not the time. Just chill out. And then the other two of her sisters show up, and we haven't really gotten to know them quite well enough to make a judgment. At least I don't have a real judgment on their characters so much. It's Marissa, is it? The one that was sleeping with Ethan? Let's see. Heather is saying, if I recall correctly, McIntyre was Hercules back in the day. Right. Othello. Oh, yeah. I think Othello shows up a little bit after this, but I might have that wrong. Alessa is the one that was sleeping with him. And Alessa is here, right? Everybody is using code names a lot of the time. This is something that I really can't decide even now if I like or not, is the conceit in these books of having every character also have like a superhero code name. I understand wanting to do it, but I don't feel like it works super well in the actual context of all of these people being real human beings. It feels like there's a reality to all of their humanity that when you change to the code names gets dampened somehow and makes it seem a lot more cartoonish. And I feel like just using their names, I really think that probably would have worked better for me. But I also appreciate that they're not going to be using their real names in conversation over comms and stuff with each other. So I don't know. This is one of those that I sort of go back and forth a little bit here. The blonde woman that had come with Pendragon said ruthfully, that's Marissa, right? And she's the one who says, of course Jordan went off on her own. She always has to show off. And I was truly, bitch, now, don't do that. Don't do that. Girl, go have your fucking bitterness somewhere else. This is not the fucking time. And thankfully, Achilles is like, stop it. But I don't know if she thinks that makes her look good. It does not. It's just not a good look, sweetie. Not now. No. So anyway, Revenant is the code name for Marissa. Is that right? I'm trying to just make sure that it says, Revenant says that I can stealth in and look for Viper. The eagerness in her eyes couldn't be contained by the small blue diamond shapes that encircled her eyes or the lightly tinted lenses of the mask. She pulled a small 0-point energy pistol from her royal blue utility belt and checked it. I can waltz right past those tossers without them seeing me. Oh, you're right. That's Alessandra. Because that's what Stryker said. Okay, yeah. See, this is what I'm saying. Because I don't know some of these people well enough, jumping between their real name and their code name is tricky. If it were just like the core crew and I knew them really well, I think it might be better for me. But anyway, they need to break up the guardsmen. Achilles says that he's going to go across the street and deal with those guys and try and hold them back. And one of the sisters has set up like a dome that's protecting all of them at the same time, which is pretty dope, so that they're able to completely regroup here and not have to worry about being injured. And eventually that gets dropped. And Heather says that's Deirdre. Who's Deirdre? Is that another sister? I'm sorry if this is something that I should remember and I'm not. Okay. So we've got Alessandra, we've got Deirdre, and we've got Marissa. Alessandra, who has the blue costume, is the one that was sleeping with Ethan. Marissa was the cop. Is that right? And Deirdre was the teacher. And Alessandra was some executive. Was she a lawyer? I feel like... Okay. It's coming back to me. Sorry, Heather. Okay, so... I love this point where everybody is sort of like talking to FX and being like, I thought that you said that you would be able to keep this thing from, like, things like this blind from working. And he's like, yo, man, I'm up against a fucking alien, guys. I'm doing my best. I can't just predict everything he's going to do. And I really felt for him on this because he's just like, come on, give me a fucking break. And I just like, guys, yeah, you should give him a fucking break, truly. So they all split up, and we cut then to Viper getting the shit kicked out of her. It's pretty satisfying in that she doesn't let them like see her sweat too much, even here. It isn't until later when Tretiak really like digs in that you have her screaming and obviously in pain in a way that Spears is just eating up with a spoon. But here, he is beating the shit out of her, and she's just not really giving him what he wants. He's trying to enjoy it, and he's making all the threats, talking about how, like, she heals really quickly so he could keep doing this forever, and that he will, essentially. I intend to take my time with you, and in that time, you will suffer in every way possible. Every sort of pain, every sort of humiliation, those will be my gifts to you, my repayment for your interference. And she says, that's almost funny, Spears, because that sound you hear out there is you losing this fight. Those screams and shouts are your child conscripts realizing no matter how much power you gave them, they're still going to fail. They're seeing you for what you are, an overconfident liar, a monster, not a father. And he tries to keep being like, oh, I have no concerns. I am certain I'm going to win. But she's able to read his expression and is thinking, yeah, you have some concerns. I can tell you are not as confident as you're trying to pretend you are. So let's see. My friend here, he wants me to give you to him. He promises that he can change your allegiance to him and therefore me. I have to admit, the idea is very tempting. I'd enjoy seeing you torn apart and rebuilt into something you would despise. And this is one of the first times that while we're in Viper's head, we really get her going, okay, that actually might work. I don't like this so much. She's trying not to give him reactions, very understandably. But she has experienced what Tretiak's abilities are like and how effective they are. And she knows all too well that it's possible he would be able to break through and do what he's saying. And she's thinking about Tretiak and Brian and wondering just about like the connection here, which Vondry picks up on. And he says, my friend here is the source of this particular awakening. What I did to Brian was a science experiment. A bit of this and that went into him, which diluted any influence the Crimson Shark would have over him. What he would do to you would be to subvert your entire being. I suspect you would be quite powerful, but who you are would be like a half-forgotten memory. I've studied the process extensively. The man who created it is very brilliant. Speaking of Brian, I wonder how he's faring out there with so much blood and violence. I suspect he will end up turning on everyone once his control finally slips. I built him like that. It was quite simple. All I had to do was make certain his hormone and testosterone levels were out of balance in just the right amounts. The more blood he tastes, the harder it will be for him to ignore the creature he is now. And this is the one that really gets to Viper. He's baiting her. She knows it. And for the most part, she can resist it. But this one is too much. And she gives him exactly what he wants, saying he thought you were his friend. And he's like, yeah, I know that, because he's a dodo. That's my whole point. And I find it weird that you like him, actually, because he is such a dodo. But I don't know, maybe you like guys that aren't as smart as you. Like, do you like to have control over them? Maybe that's your thing. I don't even know. And as he's talking about this, she's like, oh, am I on Oprah? Wow, you're really trying to analyze me. And for whatever reason, that gets him. And he like jumps over the desk and grabs her by the throat. And I'm like, Spears, for somebody who's actively baiting a woman who is bleeding and restrained, you really can't take what you're dishing out even a little. It's kind of pathetic. You're really sad looking right now. Like, he seems to think that this is him displaying his power. Sir, not really. It's more you displaying how much less self-control you have than she has. It's something that you should be embarrassed by. Genuinely. I'm saying this like without any malice. It's just an observation. And I have to imagine if we were in Trechuk's head right now, he would have quite a lot of contempt for the way Spears is handling this entire thing. Anyway, she takes her opportunity here and she kicks him in the chest and he goes through the wall. And this is the moment where she is able to make her escape. She has to fight a lot of people here. And this is the kind of thing where the fight is described in great detail. And I appreciate it in the sense that I want to know how she fights them all off. You have to tell me. I get that. But also, it does sort of wash over me because I am not good at picturing this sort of thing. Fight scenes are always tough for me. I had this with Mistborn as well. There were long sequences of physical action that I started to just sort of go, yeah, I get it. They win, they lose. Like, tell me. And it was sort of, and this doesn't take as long as the ones in Mistborn. But I feel like this sort of precision in the writing is wasted on me. It's sort of the same thing as like describing the military equipment or the types of planes, things like that, where I'm like, I'm sure other people can appreciate the attention to detail here. I don't. You could literally have made all of those up and I would never know. So, at this point, she's gotten almost everybody down, and then she hears the sound, and she's like, oh, I know what that sound means. And she turns around, and Crimson Shark is transforming. This is the last glimpse that we get of Briar, I think, because he's like scrambling away from everybody. And she gets up and in midair, she pulled her legs up, slipping her bound arms down to bring them to the front of her body. Still locked in the manacles, but with her arms in front of her now, Viper slammed into the ground hard. And I'm trying to picture this. It's basically like she's doing a backwards jump rope over her own hands. And I just don't think, even at my most fit, I could ever. I think it depends how long the lead between the manacles is, probably. I just can't imagine. And I am certain that there is some clip from some movie where a person performs this exact move. This was one that I could picture pretty easily. But the concept, there are things that our bodies, like human beings, can pull off. But if you just tell me about it, I'm like, no, I don't see it. That doesn't sound like a thing a person's body could do. And then you like watch the Olympics and like the, uneven bars, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. I guess we're all capable of quite different things. So she gets outside, she slams into the earth, she's free for a second, and then all of a sudden she gets gripped up and chucked, and then slams into the ground again. And here's Spears using his his stupid armor. I hate it so much. There is something about him having to wrap himself in this that's pitiful. It's just part of the whole package with him being less than all of the people he's trying to subjugate and thinking it's making him more than. It's just, I don't know, it's a wild part of his kind of denial of himself. And I mean, granted, he has survived this long, so that's not to say that he doesn't have advantages. He's obviously really intelligent in certain ways, but when she goes hand to hand with him, it becomes very clear he has not got the kind of training he needs to go up against people who are awakened. He has had the kind of training where he is like, a challenge is the wording she uses, enough to challenge a regular person. But people with these kinds of powers, no. And I find that fascinating because I guess he's just depending on his suit entirely. That he doesn't think he has to get to the point where he's proficient by himself because he trusts so much that he will never be without this weapon. And that is truly surprising because this is not a difficult weapon to take down, as we see. She is able to kick a few specific places hard enough to get things to short out or falter, at least. What kind of testing, Spears, have you done on this thing? You know you're going to be going up against people like Stryker, who could literally lift you by a foot. I mean, later on, Brian picks him up and uses him as a fucking mallet, which is honestly the best thing that's ever happened in these books. He is beating Tretiak with spears, which that is so undignified. I will never get over it. But anyway, so the two of them are going back and forth, and she says, I see you're still the technician you were born to be. Vandre's legs barely moved as he came at Viper, and she noticed he didn't seem comfortable fighting in the cumbersome armor. When he grabbed at her with both hands, she blocked the wrists and swept his leg again, putting him down on a single knee once more. Before he could stand or strike, she made a short hop and landed a powerful right cross against his cheek that spilled him onto his back. So at this point, she has got the serious upper hand. He's on his stomach, and she's got him by the hair, and she's smashing his face into the ground. And is saying, you should have had a helmet. And there is a moment here where she is about to literally yank his head off. Honestly, I was completely here for it. There was not even a part of me that was like, you shouldn't do this. Not even a little bit. Her fingers tightened on Spears' blood-slicked blonde locks. You will never, ever do this again. And she reaches down to grab his jaw so that she could wrench his head free. Just as she was about to twist, Viper caught something large moving from the corner of her eye. I was just so mad. Heather, I wanted her to rip this man's head off. I really, really did. Like, a lot. Do you know how disappointed I was? I mean, bereft. Spoilers, his head does not get ripped off. It doesn't. It's really such a bummer. So, she throws herself out of the way because here's Tretiak. Because reminder, they went quite a ways out that window. So Tretiak had to like come and catch up with them. And he has come upon her beating the shit out of this man that he himself despises. So this has just got to be fucking icing for Tretiak. And he is like, you are very good at this. And she says, I don't know what you find so interesting in me, but I promise I won't go easily. And I'm like, yeah, that's it, Viper. What are you not getting? And immediately he says, I hope not. And I'm like, yeah, that's the appeal, Viper. He doesn't want you to go down easy. That's not the fun part for him. And I mean that in every sense of the go down. Vondre says, just kill her and be done with it. And I was really surprised. And then he says, I can clone her. I will clone her. And you can do whatever you wish with it. I'll make you 10, 20, 100 of her. I don't know if this has been mentioned before, that he could just make a clone of her. It's not surprising. Like, it's not something that I really, when you say it, I'm not going to argue that he can. He could do all kinds of shit. So sure, he definitely can. But it never occurred to me that maybe even with the genetic material he has got of her already, he could just bide his time and have a bunch of beings that have the same powers as her. And that is super scary. That for me made my blood run cold a little bit. The idea that he knows how good she is and he could just basically have like a clone army like Star Wars. That's no bueno. I don't like it. And there's a moment where Tretiak is like, no, I want her. But they keep fighting. And she's really holding her own. And finally, he's got her pinned. And again, Vondre is like, seriously, dude, just kill her. You can't win her over. Look at this. You're about to kill her and she's not backing down. She would literally rather die. You are not going to be able to do it. Just let me make you some clones. It'll be fine. She won't have these like defenses against you that she's got now. I'll make sure she doesn't. It'll be a lot easier. And finally, Tretiak is like, okay. So he then starts to do the thing where his mouth opens like Brian's had. Because he's going to bite her entire head off. I keep thinking of Venom with this, to be honest. And then we jump away and we go back to Scorp. And this is when we get him talking about the kids. And he's heading inside to find Viper. And this was so funny because I just misread this. And it took me a second because I was like, wait, what? So the sentence is, without waiting for Savant, Scorp headed inside and found his way blocked by the massive form of Whip Scorpion. Tell me why I thought this meant Whip had been killed and his literal body was just blocking the doorway. What? What? Why would I think that? No. He is just standing, blocking the way, very much alive. But I will tell you what. I misread this so hard that when he begins clapping and talking, I'm like, wait, I thought he was dead. I truly got wholly invested in my misinterpretation of what was happening there. I just truly was like... So he says, oh, wow, good job. You beat up a bunch of third world rats. I guess that's what a superhero does, huh? Fucks up a bunch of idiot kids too stupid to realize they're just some rich guy's pawns. And I was like, Whip, I don't really understand what your flex That's what the kids say here. Weird flex, but okay. He's like, you're fucked up for beating up on kids. Not, I'm fucked up for being part of a team defending with kids. For being part of a team whose entire strategy is based around having an army of kids. Why is your thing not like, you know, and I'm assuming he doesn't actually think Scorp is worse than him. He is just messing with Scorp's head. But truly, what a weird position to take. What are you even saying? So this is when Jill comes in and sees him and is like, oh boy, that man is very large. And she appears to sort of back away. But what she turns out to have done is to sort of like sidle up in another spot where he can't see her. And Scorp and Whip begin to fight. And eventually she manages to take a shot at Whip Scorpion that throws him off balance enough that Scorp is able to finish the job and take him down. And it works. But later on, Scorp is like, hey, don't do that again. I understand that you have like these really high tech, their helmets that manage to like target. And he says, I know Widow's very good at what she does and that the design is probably fine, but I am really, really fast. And I am not sure that those things are built to sort of accommodate what I can do. And thankfully she doesn't try and argue and go, well, I just like saved you. So she just says, okay. And I was like, that's growth, Jill. That's growth. So he takes him down and they continue to head down the hallway and she is taking his vitals basically the way that she does with her power and is like, oh yeah, you need a couple of power bars real quick, bud, because you are not doing okay. And then she says something about how she's going to have to look into that a lot more and find some kind of way to produce dense calorie foods in order to keep people like her and her sister and him who have these crazy metabolisms fueled throughout a fight because they use up so much of the energy that they have eaten with their powers that they're kind of like, you know, after half an hour, they're already starting to wear down. So we jump back then to Crimson Shark and Brian jumps in and slams into him and shoves Crimson Shark 10 feet away. It is... So here's the thing. This is where I have some conflicting feelings. Where the fact that Viper had basically been beaten and gets saved by a dude, when it has felt very much like Viper's whole thing is that she doesn't need to be saved, is in its way a bit of a bummer. On the other hand, I do really like that poor Brian is able to use his abilities to save his wife, which is literally the entire reason that he decided to get this crazy thing done to him, was because he felt like he was sort of useless. And he gets to be useful. He gets to save her, which I kind of was happy for him, even though it's like a really fucked up situation. There was a part of me that was sort of going, you know what? Good for you. Like, if you hadn't gotten this crazy shit done to you, she probably would die. So it felt like a justification for the wild steps that he decided to take. And also, there's a part of me that's like, the fact that Viper has never needed to be saved by anybody else, that has felt like when she's in danger, I'm not as worried, because it feels like I know she's always going to be able to get out of everything. So there was a part of me that kind of appreciated that here was a moment where I go, actually, this is the first time I've felt genuinely afraid for her. Like, other than when Brian grips her up, because truly that was awful. But you know what I'm saying? Just, this isn't something that's like a pattern for her. She was genuinely steps away from being killed. And I don't know. So, like I said, I have very conflicting feelings, because part of me doesn't want her to just have been saved by her husband. And another part of me has just kind of been rooting for Brian a lot and feels really glad that he was able to do this for her. And the two of them, him and Tretya, going at it as hard as they do, hammer and tongs, as they say, is extremely fun to me. And it's essentially what's being said here is that the two of them are at equal strength and ability. But Brian is fueled by such rage at what was happening to his wife and what Tretiak was doing that he has the advantage of being like a little bit extra unhinged. And he just decides to completely unload on this guy. So then we go back to Viper, and she is, because like at one point Brian looks over at her and she's not moving at all. And he gets a bit of a burst of adrenaline because it seems pretty, he's assuming that she may actually be dead. And that's just sending him right over the edge. But we go back to her and she is healing. It's not great still. She's healing and it's happening and she's going to be able to get up in a second. But the damage done was pretty severe. She is watching the two of them fighting and is just kind of like, good God. Like, there's a part where Brian bites off half of Crimson Shark's face and his eye is gone. That is... I really wonder what Brian thinks when he like sobers up, so to speak, and he remembers that he bit this man's face off. Does he have a moment of like, oh God, I really would like to forget that? Or does he go, yeah, good. I wish I could bite his face off again. Fuck that guy. I want to know, you know? So anyway, Viper is watching this. He snaps Crimson Shark's neck. Viper gasped. The Brian she knew was gone. And I was like, bitch, what? That man was wrist deep in your guts. Yeah, he snapped his neck. Are you kidding? I would have done it. Not that I could. I'm not married to you. And I see a man wrist deep in your guts and I'm going to try and break his neck. What are you even talking about? Like, there's just this shock in her that I did not feel was warranted at all. This is a completely reasonable response. Yeah, Brian is like unleashing in a way that he doesn't get too often, but he is literally up against somebody who is made the exact same way he's made. So unleashing is the only way he's going to win. How did you want this to go? What did you think was going to happen? Really? Especially considering she had been literally ready to rip Spears' head off. But now she has the nerve to watch Brian fight this guy and snap his neck and be like, I can't believe he did that. But you were like, okay, fine. So she's watching this and behind her, she hears the whirring and she turns and she sees Vondre sprinting for one of the ships, one of the Genegier ships. And she is like, oh, I do not think so. And she's deeply injured, but she still gets up and starts to run after him because she is just like, over my dead body, you are getting away. I don't think so. Yeah, Heather says, I feel like she is still stuck thinking of Brian as the weaker partner and so cerebral. Okay, I guess that because, like, the shock that she feels, I'm putting it down to shock at his killing the guy. But I think you're right. It's like, it specifically says the Brian she knew was gone. So it's more shock that, like, the Brian that I have fallen in love with and married would never even have been capable of doing this. It's not even necessarily the judgment call he's making by killing the guy, but simply the fact that he can. That's so disorienting, I guess. I can accept that. Okay. That makes sense, Heather. So she grabs him and is saying there's no scenario that you get to just run away and lick your wounds. I'm not letting you do this to our world again. And she grabs his neck and he says, "Oh, I'm definitely coming back. You don't have the killer instinct. You're a blunted dagger." Viper blinked as Vondre made no effort to resist her, his inhuman smile widening when she hesitated. I should mention, he has had that little, like, device to make him look human, and it's gone, so now he just looks straight up Genegier. And he says, "I surrender to the United States of America." This is very, like... So, Brian comes up and says, "Do it. Kill him. He deserves it." And this is part of, I think, what fueled me taking the earlier sentence the way that I did. Is this moment. Brian Agincourt, her Brian, would never have condoned killing a helpless man. And the hungry look that accompanied her husband's demand sent chills along Viper's spine. And then she stops and is like, "I do want to kill him, though. I really shouldn't be so judgy. Because, like, I really, really want to." And my moment was just a helpless man. I don't feel like that's really the appropriate way to describe him. No, maybe he isn't, like, actively threatening your life. A helpless man, though? That's not it either. And he says, "He tried to take you from me. Kill him for us." And this is when Vondre says, "Oh, Brian, I didn't know you had it in you. Good for you." And then Vondre says, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you truly are." And he gets this delighted, gleeful look. The hairs on the back of Viper's neck suddenly stood on end. She knew the quote well. It was from Machiavelli's The Prince. Viper quickly looked over her shoulder as Brian's scent was overcome with adrenaline and recognized the phrase for what it was, a trigger. "What did you do?" "I took him off his leash," Vondre sneered. So Brian begins to lose control of himself because this dude has been programmed with this, like, just a switch in him that Vondre flipped. And he manages to keep control of himself just long enough to turn and run before he can harm his wife. You know what wouldn't have happened if you had just killed him? This. The man is not helpless, Viper. I don't know how many times you need it to be displayed to you that he has got everything in his back pocket at all times. But you have got to get over this, like, weird thing you have about not wanting to kill him. So, whole thing with Brian and him eventually running away. Vondre is running towards his ship, and he really thinks that either Brian is going to attack his wife or that Viper ran after him. So he thinks he's home free and is, like, climbing onto the ship, and then she grabs him again and says, "I should kill you for what you've done." And her dad shows up and is like, "Yup, yeah, you should." And he says, you can't rehabilitate someone like him. He's been this way for thousands of years. This is in his genes. And she says, but I won't. You don't get to take that choice from me, Vondre. And everybody, even her little sister, is like, just kill him. What are you doing? And she says no. And then says, right isn't easier. We said when we broke away from our government, we would change things. We would do things better and do them right. Right isn't easier. Right doesn't cost less. Does it, Dad? Nope. Nah. Doubt it. Nah. Never. Not even a little bit. Absolutely no. No. I am not with it. The whole thing. Jill says, what if he escapes? You know this has happened. Tretiak fucking got out. Aftermath got out. And she asks Jill, are you saying that because you want to protect or out of fear? And I'm like, why do those have to be mutually exclusive? Wanting to protect people from somebody who is like such a maniac that they have managed to undo all the restraints put on them multiple times, and being afraid because he has done this, those are not mutually exclusive concepts. And eventually Scorp says we need him because more people out like him are out there. A bloody ton of them. He's going to tell us what to expect when they show up. And eventually, at the very end of this chapter, she thinks to herself, and he'll tell me how to fix my husband. Now, if we started with those two arguments, we need him to give us information about what they're like. And she was saying, I need him to undo what's happened to Brian or to like mitigate it. Fine. I wouldn't love it, but it would feel more legit. But her just acting like killing him is too much the easy option. I am not in agreement at all. Not even a little. This, like her father said, thousands of years. How many there are literal children that you guys have just had to fight. That this man has mutilated and tortured into creatures. Like, what are you talking about? I just completely could not get behind this at all. And even the concept here of like, more like him are out there. Savant says, what could we possibly learn from him that we can't learn from Lyndon? And he doesn't answer. When Scorp says there's a lot of them, we need him to tell us what to expect when they show up. And I'm like, you didn't answer her question though, because Lyndon will also tell you that. What does he have that you can't? And he doesn't say, you know? And Cassidy is saying, well, you think you can get this guy to help you? He's not going to help. And Viper says, he'll help because he'll be here when they come. And if we fail to stop them, they'll get their hands on him sooner if I'm not feeling charitable. Nothing we can do to him will come close to what they will do once I tell the Genagir about all his dirty little secrets. He's from a warrior culture. What do they do to traitors, I wonder? And she looks over at him and he's like, the whole grin is wiped off his face. And she says, like I said, he's going to help. Okay, here's my problem. I definitely think you can make use of him. If you want to, like, save your husband, sure. I don't think you need him for info about the Genagir because I think Lyndon is a perfectly adequate source for that. But also, being like, I'm not going to kill him, but I'll hand him over to people that I know will torture him to death. That's not, like, better. That's not a moral high ground. You can't be like, killing him is us taking the easy way out. And then use the possibility of torture and death at somebody else's hands as a weapon against that person. And act like you're somehow better. That's just you pawning off the dirty work because you don't want to do it. But it's really convenient for you that somebody out there would do it. So you'll take advantage of that for yourself. But you're not going to actually like do any of that yourself. That feels like a big cop out to me. This is one of those like moral quandaries, and a ton of stuff sort of ends in this way where it's actually a different enemy that winds up catching up so that we can have the main hero keep their hands clean, but we still as an audience get the satisfaction of seeing the bad guy taken down. And it's just a really like, it feels dishonest to me. It feels like I want for my main character to be able to like have this feeling of superiority morally. But I recognize that keeping this guy alive isn't actually a good thing. So I'm going to take him out, but I'm going to make sure that they aren't sullied by it. And I don't like, that's not necessarily what's exactly happening here, because they haven't shown up. She hasn't handed him over or anything. But there's a sense to it where he really believes her. And if he is so certain that she's not going to do what she threatens when she's saying she's going to kill him, I wouldn't think she's going to hand him over either. So that wouldn't, like, if I'm him, I wouldn't really take that threat seriously. And he seems to take it quite seriously. So I don't know. But yeah, this is just so, I just like the whole, we can't kill him because that's like not the right thing to do. Bullshit. It's not the right thing to do. Like, I just genuinely don't see how it isn't the right thing to do. Killing people isn't an inherently bad thing. I just don't believe that it is. Some people don't deserve to be alive after some of the things they've done. And that's not to say that I support like capital punishment, because it's a whole different animal tied into a fucked up system that is wrong a lot of the time. But in a circumstance like this, I would absolutely kill that guy and be able to sleep that night. No problem. It would not weigh on me one bit. Just wouldn't. And I do find it funny how many people are around her going, just kill him. Because I kind of feel like you leave this guy alone, somebody's going to kill him. He's going to just turn up dead because everybody's going to be like, you know what? All right, fine. You don't want to do it. Fine. So Heather says, well, that's presuming she's being honest about handing him over. She's using his expectations because he's a piece of shit who projects his lack of morals on everyone else. It's like abusers and criminals who always assume that people around them inherently behave the same way they do. But that's the thing. You're saying that he's assuming his lack of moral, but his whole premise here is based on, I don't think you're going to kill me because you just won't do that anymore. He 100% believes he is safe from her particularly. And she's got a knife to his throat and he is unbothered. He is so sure that she won't. So him like believing that she would hand him over, he would have to believe the same kind of cold-bloodedness in her for that as for stabbing him in the throat. It just doesn't line up for me. And frankly, I want Brian to bite his head off. My ideal ending here is that Brian bites his head off. That's what I like 100% want to happen. So, you know, maybe he can like tell them, here's how you fix Brian, write it down. Brian bites his head off, and then we put Brian in a tank and we fix him. And he doesn't bite anybody else's heads off anymore. Just that one last one is a treat. Just a treat. I'm just saying. So, yeah. So that's that. Heather says, how often do we see him do actually dirty work? I mean, he had an entire lab filled with children being experimented on, screaming in pain, unconscious. I feel like we've seen him do quite a bit of dirty work, Heather. I don't know. I'm just saying. but he wasn't actually working on them. I don't know. Like, I'm assuming that he was. I assumed that he, like, came in and dealt with stuff. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, look, you can make all of the, well, what about the, I don't buy it. I just don't. That's where I'm at right now. We'll see. We'll see. I'm over time, so I do have to wrap up. But, yeah, I just don't know. So the next episode is Friday, September 2nd. I can't believe it's about to be September. Yo, what has happened to this year? But yeah, so I'm pretty interested to see how this like completely wraps. So thank you, Heather, for commissioning this. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Hope that you're enjoying. And until September 2nd, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.